One of the reasons why renewable energy, especially solar, is so superior to fossil fuels and nuclear energy is because it's so effortlessly abundant. I mean, each day the Earth collects literally enough sunlight to power the world for an entire year. We just decided to get smart about it and begin harnessing this seemingly infinite source of power. And I mean, some parts of the world are way ahead of the curve. I mean, take a look at South Australia, for example, which already boasts one of the highest levels of rooftop solar penetration in the world. And they're actually having an issue where they simply have too much solar. Imagine that. I mean, they have so much, in fact, that SA Power Networks, which is their sole electricity distributor in the region, has decided that they will switch off new rooftop solar systems beginning the 28th of this month in an effort to stabilize the grid and prevent too much power from entering the system during peak solar generation. Some are probably wondering, well, why is this even necessary to begin with? And it's because of a phenomenon known as the duck curve, which refers to the drop in demand for grid electricity from about 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., and then begins to rise towards the evening to its highest point in the day before dropping off a little bit approaching midnight. This curve in demand resembles that of a duck, and if you're having trouble seeing it, go look it up online. But because of that, that's why it's called the duck curve. Unfortunately, there's a mismatch here, as you could probably already tell, between when the most solar energy is being produced and when homeowners actually need that power, which is the same issue we're seeing in South Australia. Think about it. Where is everyone from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m.? They're at work. And sure, COVID may have changed that for some individuals who now work from home, but for the majority of people, the energy demand is relatively the same, following the same pattern preceding the pandemic. So in an effort to somewhat relieve this oversupply, SA Power Networks introduced tariffs encouraging the use of electricity midday to essentially soak up some of this peak solar production, because again, while all this solar is being generated, no one's really home. So although this may sound good in theory, in reality it isn't, and for two reasons. First, this merely encourages energy wasting habits. For example, leaving the lights on and the AC running when no one's home. And that's not good, just in general, right? But two, this detracts from the main issue, which is energy storage. I mean, this is really what's going to solve this challenge that's facing the solar industry. So the ideal scenario is to collect all the solar energy and then maintain a large enough network of battery systems throughout the region to store all the excess power for use later in the evening. So if that's the solution, why aren't we already implementing more batteries throughout our grids? Well, technically speaking, energy storage is still in its early days. And one of the main reasons why it's not widespread as it should be is not because there's any lack of demand. There's just simply not enough supply. And some may be aware of how extensive the manufacturing process of batteries are, but yeah, it is quite extensive. In addition to that, some of the components and the overall process of making these battery cells are really expensive because these components, they're getting harder to acquire. And as a result of that, batteries are still priced too high for mass adoption, which is why we're not seeing them all over our communities. This is also why, for example, the Tesla Model 3 still costs upward of $35,000. And that's not even the all-wheel drive option. Luckily, though, we received some good news coming in from Tesla when they hosted Battery Day this past Tuesday. Now, before I go into Battery Day, you have to understand Tesla's events are famed. When they released the semi-truck and also secretly the Roadster 2, I mean, the crowd went wild. It was almost like watching one of Apple's events when Steve Jobs released and presented the iPhone. The crowd went wild, and these events are on the same caliber as those. So, for this battery day, the company caught the audience up to speed on all their progress for their new battery cell. These improvements, just to summarize, because it was a little long. So, to break it down, they are introducing a completely new form factor. So, the battery cell itself is it's definitely different, but notably bigger than their previous battery cells. So there's that. They have a bunch of innovative manufacturing processes that are being introduced in making these battery cells. And then also there are alterations in both battery chemistry and raw material preparation. So all told, these advances would yield a 54% increase in capacity while decreasing the dollar per kilowatt hour pack price by about 56%, also reducing the need for capital investment. That's insane. I mean, 56% decrease that's over half. I mean, even if it was just a quarter, you'd see a lot of adoption going on because it's just that much more affordable. But 56%, that's game changing. Of course, though, it comes with a caveat. This technology is not out right now. It's Elon's timeline we're talking about. And that means the technology is still years out, maybe like 2 to 3, could be more. So, I mean, the hype for this was so intense. The Tesla fanboys and girls were out in full force ahead of Battery Day, talking about, oh my God, this is it. They're having revelations about the event. And it was getting so out of hand, especially with the stock price, which was literally going to Mars. Elon had to come out on his personal Twitter account and tweet to his cult that they should essentially temper down their expectations. And then the bears, having starved since the markets crashed back in March, because really the stock market went only up since then, and they saw an opportunity. They came out in full force and literally knocked the living daylights out of the stock price from its highs of around $500 per share. But while the bulls and bears are duking it out on Wall Street, arguing about how the stock price is too high, how Elon is a hype man, which he is, and this and that, all unimportant stuff. Those that are actually paying attention and reading into the details of this battery, which again was the main point of Battery Day, would realize that this new form factor uses zero cobalt. Zilch. For people that are familiar with battery chemistry, you all already know that this is a big deal. For those that are not, well, you see, cobalt is an essential part of the battery chemistry and plays a large role in keeping the battery stable. In short, you can't have a battery without cobalt. So it sounds great and all, right? But there's one issue, and that is that it's extremely expensive, and there's simply not enough supply to keep up with global demand. I mean, EVs are growing exponentially. Demand for solar, batteries, renewables are growing exponentially. How do you keep up if the supply chain isn't evolving with it? Not to mention, there's also a slew of environmental, geopolitical, and child labor issues surrounding cobalt mining, which is centered primarily in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And the issues with child labor are actually pretty serious. In fact, it's actually funny because the oil industry, when they were really hammering away at the EV industry a couple of years back, they put up these billboards on major roadways of these poor-looking children from Africa, probably the DRC, and talking about, oh, look at how bad this mining for these metals or for these poor kids in Africa. And they use this to essentially discourage buying EVs. Oh, man. I mean, let's not go there. There's a saying that goes, when we speak evil of others, we generally condemn ourselves. And there are no shortage of condemnation for the oil industry. We'll leave it at that. That's a totally another topic. Anyways, these issues, the point is these issues are legitimate and they cannot be ignored. And it is one of the main reasons why there is a shortage of cobalt in the first place. And one of the reasons why battery cell prices are so high. So this has actually been a main source of motivation for researchers who are literally bending backwards trying to figure this out. But really the main motivation to reduce the amount of cobalt in the current battery chemistry. Of course, though, while everyone else is struggling, Tesla comes out and claims that they will be eliminating it completely. Yeah. To understand how significant this all is, think about it like this way. It's almost like you're going to make ice cream without the cream. Let that sink in for a bit. It's pretty bold, but let's be honest. What else do we expect from Tesla and Elon Musk? Well, apparently Wall Street want it now, alongside some retail investors. But anyone with a conscious and some sort of understanding of battery technology would know that this will take some time. And it's not any fault of Elon's or the Tesla team. They're doing a fantastic job. They're literally doing more to progress battery technology in a year than has been done in 10 plus years before. Regardless, this bodes well for the future of battery storage because technological advances such as this will make them much more affordable and accelerate the adoption of batteries and renewables. Imagine, again, like 56% reduction in price per kilowatt hour. You'll see batteries across all communities because it'll be so affordable. And imagine being able to store all of that power from the sun instead of having it to use it right away or just outright shut off solar systems to prevent an overload on the grid and essentially wasting it. I still can't believe they have to resort to that. That's insane. Like shutting off solar systems? Holy moly. We'd practically be able to rid ourselves of fossil fuels and nuclear energy overnight because we're producing so much power and storing it all away to use. And then we just replenish it the next day with solar. There's no room for fossil fuels and nuclear energy. Of course, that's assuming we already have widespread solar, renewable, and battery implementation across the globe. So, that's still a little ways off, but we're getting there. That's what matters. And all this stored energy could also be used to help prevent rolling blackouts like we're seeing in California due to the wildfires and other parts of the country and the world due to events related to climate change, which aggravate natural disasters. So this actually alludes to virtual power plants, which I'll be talking about in another video. But with the advent of solar and batteries, communities will be able to generate and store their own power, which they can reserve for themselves or send back to the grid to power other communities, which is how it will work to prevent rolling blackouts, for instance. Now, lastly, some people may still think this is all make-believe and that all is good and well with the status quo. How many times have we heard that in history? That the future we're envisioning here will never come to fruition. Man, and yet they couldn't be more wrong. In fact, just last month, ExxonMobil was dropped from the Dow Jones Industrial Index after nearly a century. We're talking about the former most valuable company in the US for much of the early 2000s and as recently as 2011 before Apple overtook it in 2012. If there isn't a more telltale sign that the industry is losing its grip on the world, I don't know what is. And yes, the pandemic alongside oil prices going negative for the first time ever back in April definitely played a hand in its departure. But these merely accelerated the industry's downturn, which started well before the lockdowns began. And then add on top of that the record number of coal plant closures in 2019, decommissioning of nuclear power plants across the country and the globe, and the fact that wind and solar comprise 76% of new electricity capacity in the US this year so far. And actually, big oil is increasing their assets in renewable energy at some of the fastest clips we've seen. They're buying solar and wind left and right. This week, in fact, French oil major Total, they added another 3.3 gigawatts of Spanish solar to their renewables portfolio just yesterday, actually, which will be enough to power all its European industrial operations by 2025. The writing is on the wall, and no one, not even big oil, can afford to be left behind. I'm just wondering who's going to buy out all their oil assets, because who's going to need it? So I'm excited. The energy industry is literally transforming before our eyes. And I say, bring it on.